The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
And welcome to the Writer's Block Podcast. I'm Mandra Biscornet, and I believe everyone has a story to tell. What's yours?
And I'm Deborah Monk, empowering you to find your creative voice.
On today's show, we're going to spend some time talking about how to write a good bad guy. We're going to explore the ways to make your antagonist a worthy opponent for your protagonist.
Yes.
We'll give you some examples of bad guys we hate to love and those we love to hate.
Perfect. Let's explain for our listeners, because I always have to think it through, antagonist and protagonist.
All right, so let's define them.
Yes.
All right, so our protagonist is the main character.
Right. Generally considered the hero of the story.
The good guy,
right.
The hero,
the white hat.
The one that the action is all sort of surrounding.
And the protagonist, the antagonist. See what I mean?
Yes, I see.
Yes.
The antagonist is the one who keeps presenting obstacles to the protagonist.
The villain, the bad guy, the black hat.
He actively opposes.
And it should be easy because he antagonizes the hero, but I still always have to work it through.
All right. Well, that's okay. Now that we've got that sorted out, our definitions, let's talk about how to make our villains believable. Because it'd be easy to just sort of say, well, you just write the bad guy as evil, doing all these bad things.
Right.
How hard can that be? But that's very one-dimensional. And if all they do is just
bad things,
then that's not going to be believable for your reader. So you want to make sure that the villain is believable, logical, but not likable.
Well, he can even be likable.
Well, he can be.
Because that was my job today for the research, was to come up with likable bad guys.
Right.
So he can be likable, but he has to be bad.
He does have to be bad. And things you might want to ask yourself is, why does the antagonist believe his actions are justified? What is sort of driving those evil actions? Like, what's motivating that bad behavior? And that will help you develop sort of a whole picture as far as a person goes.
Multi-layered, dimensional, right? A bad guy isn't just a bad guy. It's how did he become a bad guy? Why is he a bad guy?
Right. Because, again, to do as much evil as possible by itself will not be enough for a strong character. Because not only will the readers not believe in the villain, but they won't think the villain is a worthy opponent for your protagonist. Right? If the protagonist is overcoming all these struggles and the villain is just doing bad things, it's going to be an easy matchup, and the reader's going to be like, well, I know who's going to win this.
Right.
Also, a well-crafted bad guy increases the suspense, because then you are wondering, is the protagonist
who's going to win?
Yeah, who's going to pull out of that? Is he going to be able to overcome? So that helps add dimension and suspense to your book.
And the same thing can be said about the hero. The hero shouldn't just be a good guy. Mm-hmm. It can be a good guy who does a bad thing.
Right.
And that can make him, I think it was Nicolas Cage who was in the movie where he holds a doctor hostage. And I think the movie starts with that. But then you find out it's because he's been denied. His son needs a heart transplant, and he's been denied. Mm-hmm. And so his insurance won't cover it. So he does a bad thing. He holds this hospital staff, the operating room, hostage. So he's theoretically the bad, but a good guy.
But you can understand that motivating behavior.
Right. And so the same can be said for both. You want to give your hero bad qualities, and you want to give your villain good qualities to make them more interesting.
Right. I think sometimes people make characters too two-dimensional, right? And people are more nuanced than that.
Right.
And more interesting characters have these nuances.
Right.
So one question that that kind of came to mind is, what's your villain's why? Like, what's his why? What's his reason? What's or her? Because I came across some great female villains as well. And then ways to kind of make them even more evil were, we can get into that a little bit later. Why don't we see what
All right, so my job was to come up with the heroes that we love to hate.
The villains that we love to hate.
Yeah, see what I mean? Damn it. I'm so confused today. But anyway.
This is a show about antagonists.
Yes. So I think the best example is Hannibal Lecter. He is the bad guy, but he is also, when you think about Silence of the Lambs, as much as you think about Jodie, what's her name?
Foster.
Thank you, Jodie Foster, who was the main character of the movie. Hannibal Lecter took over that movie. He ruled it. So you think, okay, he was the quintessential bad guy. He murdered people and he literally ate them. I mean, can it get any grosser than that? But why in the story are we all sort of rooting for him? We all want him to. We want him to escape that mask that they've got him in. And I think a big way that they did that was, yes, he was a serial killer, but really the way we saw his character play out in the movie was in his role as a mentor for Jodie.
Right.
And so we saw that he had faith in her. In a way, he had more faith in her ability to catch the other bad guy.
Well, because
than she had.
That's interesting that in that movie, Hannibal Lecter isn't the one out doing all, committing the crimes and the murders, excuse me, that Jodie is investigating.
But we do know he was connected. I think he trained that other serial killer, or he taught him. He was his teacher. Right. So he was connected. So he's even connected to what's happening now. But we don't despise him for it because we see him. And one of the things that they say about serial killers is they have, in real life, one of the definitions of a serial killer is generally they have no empathy. They have absolutely no remorse, no feeling for who they kill or why they kill. And so Hannibal Lecter had empathy. He had empathy for Jodie Foster. And at the very end of the movie, he says, the world is a better place with you in it. So even though I'm free, I'm not planning to come have you for dinner. Mm-hmm. So he has empathy for her. So they took this serial killer and gave him qualities that aren't common to serial killers. Right. So to me, I think he was one of the best.
Yeah, and I think the one from television is Dexter, right?
Yes.
I mean, people even liked him.
Yes.
Right? So
but he killed bad people.
And that makes it okay?
It certainly changes the dynamic.
Yeah, and I think that's what was so fascinating about that show.
Right. Absolutely.
Right,
another one.
Then it kind of calls into question.
Well, it's people's morality. Right. And justice.
Right. The other thing with Hannibal Lecter I just wanted to mention was he was written as a very intelligent. Like his intelligence, I think, was a quality that you could admire, even if as twisted as it may be. That level of intelligence
kind of almost didn't compensate, but it contrasted.
Right.
Well, that brings us to my next bad hero, which is Dracula.
Oh.
So now Dracula was very elegant. He was very he originally Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897 wasn't romantic or sexy, but that's because he had to fit in with the times. And in those times, sex was completely taboo and it had terrifying consequences. There was the outbreak of syphilis, and even childbirth was often deadly for a woman. So Victorian women couldn't even show their legs. Piano legs were covered with pantaloons. So in those days, when Dracula was first written, it wasn't considered sexy or romantic. But then in 1931, the film Dracula changed the image forever of vampires. Bela Lugosi was suave, he was elegant, he was a charmer, he was always in formal wear. So, and he also developed a conscience by falling in love with the women that he was lusting after. But he was handsome, tortured, romantic hero, gave rise to a whole new genre like Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, Twilight. So Dracula, a person who's going around, biting women and damning them for the rest of their lives, became the hero of the story.
Elevated.
Completely.
Yeah.
They're good looking, they're powerful, they're dangerous, they're immortal, they're eternally youthful, they're not bound by the laws of morality except their own conscience. Mm-hmm. And in a culture that is youth and sex obsessed, what could be better than being young and beautiful and able to indulge in your dark desires and sexual fantasies forever? So Dracula is the perfect example of the bad guy who you're kind of rooting for.
Right. Because you kind of want to be him.
You kind of want to get bit. You're kind of thinking, well, if he does
that's not that bad.
I'll be young and beautiful. Oh, God, sounds like torture. But anyway, so I thought he was another good. And I just have one more. And this one, the Joker.
Yep.
The Joker's a bad guy. But I think the painted smile kind of confuses you. But also, the Joker is most potent when he's reflecting the fears of society as a whole. So Jack Nicholson who was the Joker in the purple-suited mob boss look, was a garish reminder of the drug and crime epidemics of the 1980s. And then Heath Ledger walking away from the pile of burning money in 2008, well, that was particularly striking as the world was entering an economic crisis. So the bad guy, because people in general find our fears as fascinating as our desires. So we focus on what we're afraid of and what we desire the most with equal energy, I believe. Mm-hmm. And so the Joker was an example of embodying our society fears, which makes them fascinating. You can't help but watch and see what they're going to do.
Right. So it doesn't have to be sort of that active violence. It's playing on someone's fear.
Right.
And especially a fear that's being felt culturally.
Right. And I think it's a kind of a quiet seduction. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not really overt. I've never thought of, Jack Nicholson, I believe it was Jack Nicholson, said, "Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight?"
Right.
And he was the Joker.
Yes.
I was, me, I was like, "No, I haven't. I want to dance with you."
Well, and that created like a formidable opponent for Batman.
Yes.
It wasn't just a thug. Like, again, there was a lot more to that character. There was an intelligence. There was
an education.
Right.
An intention. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think that it's almost equally important to focus on your bad guy, to develop them as much as you develop your hero.
Absolutely, because that will play into the
quality
right.
of the battle between good and evil. And you want to know that it's not just a given.
So that the protagonist is going to be right. You want to be a little unsure because that's going to keep you reading.
Right.
To figure out, well, who actually wins.
Yep.
I think the other interesting thing with the Joker and with Batman is that they both had struggles early on. Right. Batman's family's killed, the mess up with the Joker's face, all that. But on one hand, Batman sort of overcame those struggles to be the good guy.
Right.
And on the other hand, the Joker didn't, and that brought him more into the realm of evil.
Well, and I think that the interesting thing is Batman was able to take his mask off. So he was able to go live kind of a normal life, whereas the Joker, because of what had happened to him, was forced to be that character all the time. He never got a break.
Right.
And so you almost felt a little more, you almost had a little bit, I think, you felt a little bit more sorry for the Joker.
Right.
Which made you, in some ways, not want to see, you didn't want him to win, but you also didn't want him to be defeated.
You didn't want him to win, but you also had a better understanding.
Right.
Of that motivation.
Right.
And I think that's what's key. If someone's doing harm or doing evil just for the heck of it, it's not
very
as complex a character,
right.
And you're not going to have any empathy or, even start to understand why they might be doing what they're doing. But if there's a good story behind that, then you're more apt to believe the character, not necessarily root for them, but understand their why.
Right, and I think you don't want them defeated. If we go back to Hannibal Lecter, I think the movie was so interesting having Hannibal escape and call Jody from the payphone.
Right.
I think it wouldn't have been as interesting it wouldn't have been as good an ending if Hannibal Lecter had been stuck in the cell, locked on that inversion table.
Right.
Because there's a part of you that is rooting for them. You want them to overcome their own demons. You don't want them to continue doing bad. You don't want to see.
No.
We certainly wouldn't have wanted to see Hannibal Lecter kill Jody and eat her.
Right.
But we were glad to see him escape, and we're hoping that
he just kind of goes.
That he's evolved and won't continue to be that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yet that isn't the final scene him at a dinner table?
Well, yes, he's at a dinner table, but we don't know if it's filet mignon.
No, we don't.
Or something else.
But we think it's probably not.
But we love the fact that we don't know.
Right.
Right.
Questioning.
Yeah.
I'm going to name a character for you.
Yes, please.
Did you see the movie or read the book, actually, Misery?
With Kathy Bates?
Yes.
Where she
kept So she captures the author of the series that she is upset that he has written a certain way.
Yes.
And basically holds him hostage in the house. It's Annie, I think
is her name.
Annie Wilkes is the character's name. So there's an example. Again, I wanted to work in a female villain.
Perfect.
Who's insane.
clearly.
Crazy.
Well, she was his number one fan.
Yes.
Oh, are our number one fans always crazy? I wonder. I'm trying to think of my number one
Who
fan.
is yours? And should you stay away?
Exactly.
That was what she just kept telling him.
I'm your number one
Yeah.
fan.
Your number one fan. And she, in her own twisted way, thought she was somehow helping him.
And entitled.
He had lost his way, and the books were not going in the direction she needed them to go in.
Right. That's right. So do you remember the scene that sticks in my head is when she clubs his feet?
The hobbling.
The hobbling. Yeah. And that's horrific. Like that is a scene that you can't
Sticks
get.
in your mind, right?
Yes. But I couldn't think of sort of her, not redeeming quality, but I couldn't think of ever kind of rooting for her.
Edward,
She was
no
just-
empathy for her. She was
No.
just scary.
She was scary. Yeah.
Okay.
So she had the fear thing down.
Right.
She could create a lot of fear, not only in the author that she was holding hostage, but in the audience, because she was so unpredictable. She was willing to do anything. How far was she going to go if she was willing to do the hobbling when he was tied to the bed?
So does that make her a good? So she's kind of one we love to hate.
Yes.
Whereas
we love to hate.
Hannibal Lecter, we love to hate to love. Yeah, we hate to love. We don't.
Yeah.
We feel like we shouldn't be loving the
Right,
serial
but you
killer, but we
did.
do. Right.
Right. So yes, I think
See,
that.
Right.
Even though she seemed almost pure evil, you touched on why she was interesting. Complete unpredictability.
Right.
Sort of kept you engaged with, I wonder what she'll do next.
And unpredictable because her mannerisms and her physicality, the way she looked, was very plain, simple,
unassuming,
She seemed-
undangerous.
Yeah, she seemed very pleasant right up
Right.
until she did horrific things.
Right.
So to be that unpredictable, I think, was her key to being such a good villain.
Right.
Yet you hated her, like you.
And it also, she used the contrast.
Yes.
Of I'm just a woman. I'm a middle-aged
almost
woman,
meek,
kind of
timid,
timid,
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm your number one fan. I love you the most. I love you more than anybody.
Right. And that's how she sort of trapped him.
Right.
Because she wasn't, beautiful bombshell or anything like that. It was a very unassuming manner.
So that contrast, you don't expect a middle-aged woman who's your number one fan to hobble you.
Right. So I thought that was a brilliant, brilliant villain.
Yes. Boy, we came up with we did
Deb.
well. Right here. High five.
That was great. Anything else? I think overall it's about character development and developing your villains just as much as putting just as much effort and energy into developing your villains as you do your protagonists.
And I think the point I got out of it is you don't want the character to be predictable. In your audience's reaction to them or in the actions of the character.
Yeah.
And one-dimensional.
Right.
Yeah.
If they're intelligent, give them something else that contrasts with that.
Right.
Like I'm an intelligent, or I'm a teacher and a serial killer.
Yes.
Nice.
I think that makes
Or
it
I'm
a
a
lot
middle-aged
more
woman,
interesting.
number one fan, and and I will kill you. I will hobble you. Right.
And I will also kill you. All right. Well, thank you all for listening. Please be sure to check out the Writer's Block NH Facebook and the Writer's Block podcast on your favorite podcast catcher. If you'd like to hear this episode again or share it with a friend, you can head on over to the UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. That's the United Network. I'm sorry, I messed that one up. UnitedPodcastNetwork.tv. We thank you again for listening. We hope to inspire and empower you to tell your own story.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.